Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Coco. Pixar is such a successful animation studio and such a good studio in general that anytime they make a movie, that film always has to live up to their amazing, crazy legacy of kind of great and substantial animated films. And also, I think you also almost take for granted how good they usually are. They have a pretty good pedigree going for them, and Coco is no different from that. But I think what makes Coco probably less surprising in terms of its structure and how it flows and everything like that is that Coco feels very much like something that they've done before. But instead of being that kind of normal kind of studio, like, hey, let's do the same thing we've done before a million times because that sells well and so forth, they kind of do it in a way that almost like an old studio director would, where they're like, well, I've done this structure and this thing before, so I'm going to have fun with it and do my own unique spin on that kind of a story. I've done it before, but I can do it like a well-oiled machine can. That's how Coco is kind of as many beats as I feel like I've seen before. There's so many things that just don't feel surprising and predictable in this film, but I still think it's a really good kind of charming kids animated film. It's probably one of the better animated films of the year. It's just not a surprising good animated film. It's kind of like, yeah, they can do that. And it's not surprising at all that this film works. You know, when you think about all its themes, the themes of like believing in yourself and how important family is, they're themes you see in so many animated films. It's almost like a little boring at this point to do them. But with a director like Lee Unrich, who also directed Toy Story 3, you can tell it's a studio who really knows how to tell a story. If they're going to use those familiar beats and so forth, there's a reason for it, and they're going to kind of sell you on it better than a studio who would just use those beats because they had to have those beats. It doesn't feel like Pixar made them do these things. It feels like they made these beats more organic within the story. If the studio made them do that, then I guess they're good enough storytellers that it doesn't necessarily feel that way, which is what makes Coco so fun and have so much life to it. There is a life in this film. There's a lot of love and life and humanity and family within this. You know, as much as I was like, why did they release this before Thanksgiving? It's about the Day of the Dead, which is typically, you know, the day after Halloween. This film has so many themes about family and things of that nature that I actually think it works perfectly well with a holiday like Thanksgiving. Like, exactly well. It's kind of ridiculous how well it works. The one thing that isn't as usual as other Pixar films is how much of Mexican culture is within this film, and I don't know enough about Mexican culture or Mexico, which I've never been to really talk at length or at all about that, but you can tell that they really try to get the culture and various ideas of that. Obviously, it's based on a Mexican holiday, the whole idea or the conceit of this movie, and the whole idea of like the afterlife and things like that, but you can tell that culture is entrenched within a usual Hollywood structure, which felt a little boring. It's like, it gets a little boring when you have like a whole different culture and then they use the same kind of boring Hollywood structure thing. I had the same problem with The Big Sick, where it's like, I'm all for more representation in Hollywood, but I sort of thought that meant, I understand we'd have more in different stories, but I thought we'd have more in different structures and plot devices and things. But, you know, hey, if it ain't broke, then we're just going to leave it alone, I guess. In some ways, I find that to be refreshing because you don't see that in an animated film, something taking on these parts of Mexico. Like, normally you don't really see that with this kind of a structure, and I find that to be making this film a lot more unique because of that, and I think it'll probably be empowering to people to see that kind of a story done in this kind of a big screen, big holiday family animated film, and it does that quite well, and it never feels inorganic at all. Apparently they went to Mexico a lot of times. The director Lee Unrich and the co-director Adrian Molina, they went a lot of times, and this film was the longest Pixar film ever in production from 2011 or 2010 to 2017. So it was in production for a while, and they kept going back and loving more and more of the culture, and you can feel that all throughout, and especially the songs, which I think a lot of the music in this is so good. It's probably better than the movie. Remember Me might be one of the all-time great movie songs I've heard in a long time. It's like one that was like, wow, that's really good, and the way they used it and the themes and so forth. The songs were written by various people who helped write Frozen and other people, but I thought the music was really great, but Remember Me like really stuck out to me. There's an end part with Remember Me that's just like, that was just better than they nailed that so well. I was surprised that the journey it took to get there wasn't as remarkable as that moment was. The whole idea of him going to the land of the dead and finding out about his family and learning to be a musician and everything, it like takes on too many themes we've seen before and seen in so many different animated films. It's almost the idea of animated film, like what animated films often do, often becomes a genre unto itself, because you expect, oh, the kid to believe in himself and to realize the value of family and to have a cute sidekick animal, which is the dog, who isn't really that cute, which I thought was funny. And even in this, you know, going into Pixar themes of memory, which came up in Finding Dory and Inside Out. That's interesting, I think, how they play with those themes. And this very much is both genre Pixar and genre animated film. But I still think it plays itself very well. It almost reminds me of Big Hero 6, which obviously is not a Pixar film, but I guess John Lasseter had his hands on both. Sorry. What reminded me of Big Hero 6 is that Big Hero 6 takes a standard superhero movie structure and makes a Disney animated film out of it, but it does a good job with it. It's actually probably one of the tighter, better made ones, actually. Even though at that point we'd seen it done so many times, that felt really overdone. And this feels in a similar vein. I think they actually have a little more fun with it. This film understands mainly what it's about, which is Miguel going to the land of the dead because he wants to find out about his musician grandfather and how he mistakenly took the guitar from his musician grandfather, which sent him to the land of the dead. And then while there, his family is trying to get him back, but he runs into Hector, who's going to help him find his famous musician grandfather, and hopefully he will learn to be a great musician through him, and he will help encourage him as a musician and so forth. And so it's both about family and the importance of family and what family says about you and what family can empower you to do, and also about yourself. So, which is interesting, but it kind of melds them two together. One of the things, the better ways it is about family is almost every member of the family has a unique personality. It's not just like family and so forth. I couldn't name you all their names or something. Who's gonna remember that? Like I'm supposed to remember Uncle What's-His-Face from my own life. They're very smart in how they design them, because you have two really tall uncles. You have certain looks of each of the aunts and uncles, so you understand visually that they are very different, that they're different members of your family, that they have different personalities and so forth. And this film did that remarkably well. There was never a part where I went, oh, that's the vague family. It always felt like a collection of different people who were all related. And I think Coco did that remarkably well. It was smart because it did that in a shorthand way that I thought really helped the movie actually be able to tell its story. I like that the co-director of this, and Lee Unrich was a co-director on 3 Pixar films before this, Monsters, Inc., Finding Nemo, and Toy Story 2. And he's also a film editor before. He's kind of an interesting character there. He seems to know how to use people in his cast, because Adrian Molina, who wrote the screenplay of this, Lee Unrich wrote the story with various other people, helped write music for this, was the co-director, really has his stamp on this as much as Lee Unrich does to a certain degree. And I'm very curious what's going to happen to Adrian Molina after this. It's someone Pixar should really look out for, because I think he really helped shape this film in such a regard that I think, you know, later when you think of all those films, I think maybe from what I've read, Lee Unrich had probably more of a say on Toy Story 2, but those other 2 films like Finding Nemo and Monsters, Inc. have such a directorial stamp on them, you almost like don't think of him in those. So it's kind of interesting how well he uses other personalities throughout this. This film probably wouldn't be the same, because I don't really get a directorial voice from this and Toy Story 3. I always looked at him in terms of the Pixar directors as more of the craftsman, and I think you definitely get that through the flow of this film. This feels like a craftsman more than an auteur in a lot of ways, but it's kind of funny that this, yeah, you would say the flow and the structure of this plays like a craftsman, but there's no Pixar movie that looks like this, that has these beautiful colors, that has, you know, when they show the city and you see like this vast space and this vast world that's in there, it really gets into the whole afterlife. It has this whole world and has all these rules, and he conveys those excellently well. He's just a really good craftsman. He's probably one of the great craftsman directors of our age, and I think in Coco he does do it very well. It just doesn't feel exciting, but maybe Pixar isn't as exciting as it used to be, really, and that's probably the bigger problem. Inside Out was kind of like a glimpse of genius that we're probably not going to get a lot of for a while, since there's not an original non-sequel Pixar movie coming out for the rest of the decade. This was it. We're getting just sequels after this one, and even with the Disney films as well. This shows a craftsman who knows how to take on anything and make a really good story out of it. That's kind of the craftsman studio filmmaker company man that I think Lee Unruh does really well. You might think I'm kind of shitting on him and being like, oh, he's not the most original director there, but he's still a really, really good director. I was maybe a little bored just because I've seen so many animated films and it doesn't really seem to do anything new with it, but it's also like, while I was watching it, I was like, yeah, but is it like actually trying to do anything new at this point? I think in certain ways, because Pixar pushed the boundaries in a lot of ways, you kind of want them to have all those crazy things within it still, but like Coco is kind of the well-oiled machine churning out, you know, another hit, but still being really good at it. I liked how he used Hector. I liked how he did the designs of the skeletons. I generally liked a lot of the designs. It did feel very Pixar-y, so it wasn't like astonishing or anything like that. I think you can do more with CG that Pixar often doesn't do enough of, and I think this film differentiates itself enough from Book of Life that we don't really need to keep talking about that whole thing. But I really like the voice cast, who are mostly unknowns except for Gal Barcia Barnell and Benjamin Bratt. And even those guys don't necessarily sound like those guys. You kind of forget they're those guys, which is really cool for a big animated film. You usually kind of know who the actors are and you can kind of tell throughout. But this, it felt like I was really going into a different world, and maybe some of these actors are more well known in the Spanish speaking community. Maybe they're not. I have absolutely no clue, but I thought it was well cast. It didn't have huge stars within it. It lets it kind of exist in its own kind of cool world, you know. I do think that this is probably like a lesser period for Pixar, and it just does feel like they're sort of declining in quality, but I still find this film like a really entertaining, fun, charming film. If you're going to take your family to see a movie, this is like an easy play. It'll definitely play well. You'll have a great time. You might cry at certain parts, but you won't be surprised. You'll be like, that was an animated film. We had a good time. You know how Pixar is. I mean, that's kind of what this movie is. You'll go, you know how Pixar is, and go, yeah. And that's like at the base level, that's what this is. But it took on a different subject matter. It took on the Day of the Dead. It took on this whole thing of the afterlife, and did all of that, but with Pixar. And that might sound boring. That might be exactly what you thought this was going to be from the trailers, but I still think they had enough fun with it and were so good at doing and being the well-oiled machine and using these things that Coco still turns out to be a really good and really entertaining movie. And I will probably remember this movie for a while because I love the song Remember Me. It's such a beautiful song. It has a good enough flow and structure to it that I don't really mind it. I think it goes through the whole ideas of the afterlife and being remembered, and how as more and more the people you know die and the people who knew you, and how, you know, eventually your story will kind of fade away as everyone who ever knew you goes away, is one of the darker themes that this film manages to get into. All of that structure and everything that's going on, it manages to hit on these things, and those scenes are memorable and impactful and everything like that. And that's something I think Pixar just does amazingly well, and has always done very well, and Coco shows that. Coco kind of shows more of the strength of Pixar as an animation studio, as most of their things do, but I think it shows that they can still make a well-oiled machine kind of original hit movie, and that's what Coco is. And Coco is wonderful in that. It's a wonderful Pixar movie. It's probably going to end up being on the lesser end of that, partly because they made some of the greatest animated films of all time, so that's kind of hard to live up to, but it's still a worthy entry into the canon, even if it's going against crazy competition. I don't know if I'd ever want a Coco 2 or anything like that, but if I will probably have to watch this a few more times, and I don't think I'd necessarily mind it at all. It's a cute little fun Pixar movie. It's just not one that shows the innovativeness and the experimentalness that you probably will love and always remember about the studio. This will just confirm that pretty deep and pretty far in their filmography, they still have some really fun, really entertaining movies that can still find a way to charm you, just like the innovative and experimental ones do as well. So if you've seen Coco and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.